Super Talk Radio. You're in to all things music.
Welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
Welcome, everybody. Happy Halloween. Woo! I'm scared. We're back here with my friend, Mark Robertson. He's going to ask me some questions, and I'm going to do my best to answer them truthfully.
It's about time. Well, you know what? I wanted to, before we were going to get into the Sacramento scene and all that, briefly before, I wound up doing a different podcast. Somebody interviewed me on my career, certain aspects of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw parallels because I was doing some research for this week. And I saw these parallels where, from the interviewer's point of view, he was going like, well, man, you just kind of went from this, and then all of a sudden that happened. And all these crazy things, it seems like you just tripped over them.
Mm-hmm.
And to a certain extent, I think there is some serendipity involved. But it made it sound like dumb luck. And in my case, that might be true. But I do think you have to be open to different music,
mm-hmm.
which is interesting because you went from being kind of known as a jazz fusion drummer, from being an R&B drummer, to being a rock and roll drummer. I mean, legit rock and roll drummer.
Mm.
And that ain't luck. You had to be ready when the phone call came.
Right. Right. A lot of that, it's what you listen to, the seeds you plant while listening. And like I've always enjoyed rock, I'm like most musicians who started playing, who are my age, it was the Beatles and Ed Sullivan,
Sure.
I mean, and that was big for me too,
Yeah, of course.
because I'd never seen anything like it. And so the rock thing, the British invasion, I was all into that, and only really got into jazz in my mid-20s.
Right.
So, of course, I was totally always around R&B, there was no escaping that. And I was in an R&B band, one of my first bands, but always longed for a rock and roll thing. And Norman Whitfield kind of fed that because he was into that too.
Right.
So he would, he kind of helped me in that by buying rock records.
Yeah.
He wanted me to go out and buy rock and roll records.
Yeah, that was very, very brilliant on his part.
Yes. Yeah.
Keep things open-ended and versatile.
Yeah.
So, now, when we left off, you'd done a series of seemingly random, ridiculously cool things. Doing a session with Ray Charles, joining Romeo Void, just a great San Francisco band, and then meeting up with Peterbilt, with Charlie Peacock, with Steve Griffith, with David Kahn.
Yeah.
And having people interested in your drumming for their projects out of that scene,
Mm-hmm.
which leads us into the Warehouse Church and Exit Records, yes?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So I was living in San Francisco at the time, but I had lived in Sacramento. I knew Charlie Peacock. And one day Charlie suggests or recommends me for a record he's about to do with his band called Vector. He was in Vector at the time. And so the people at Exit give me a call and asked me to come up to do the record. We work out all the particulars, and I go up and I do this record with Vector. But when I get there, Charlie has quit the band.
Oh, wow.
So it's me, Jimmy Abegg, and Steve Griffith.
Okay.
And we worked on the project for a couple of weeks, getting drums and bass. And then I came back to I was coming back to San Francisco during the weekends. I wasn't going to church or anything, so that became an issue.
You weren't even a Christian yet, though.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. I just happened to be a friend of Charlie's.
Right.
And so I was to find out sometime later that the guys in Vector wanted me to be in the band, but the people at Exit said, no, he can't be in the band because he's not a Christian.
Right.
So I go back to San Francisco, and during this time, I'm propositioned by the guys in Romeo Void to join that band, thanks to David Kahn.
Right.
Because David Kahn had produced Peterbilt demos, and now he was about to produce Instincts by Romeo Void. And we go in the studio, we do that record. Before there's any touring or anything, I get another call from Exit to come up to Sacramento and play, go to Wales with the 77s.
Okay. Had you met any of those guys yet?
Well, when I went up to do the Vector record, I met them, yeah.
Okay.
But, it was just like a how you doing, glad to meet you sort of thing, So I go up to Sacramento, and I'm rehearsing with the Sevens, and we go to Prestadden. We spend 2 weeks in Prestadden, Wales, and I was still in Self-Realization Fellowship. I still had my guru.
Mm-hmm.
And so the guys were talking to me about that, nothing aggressive or anything, just conversations because they were interested. And so when we go over to Prestadden, Wales, one of the main speakers there is Ravi Zacharias,
okay,
who's Indian.
Right.
And so I'm very intrigued about his presence there. Why is this guy a Christian? Because, I was thinking like the Indians had it,
Right.
They had it with their Sufis and gurus and stuff. I just thought that was it. And so I listened to him as much as I could, and eventually bought a Bible while I was there, start reading the Bible. And one night I went to a show that the Sevens weren't playing the show, but there wasn't anything else to do that night.
Right.
So it's like, let's go hang out. And so we went to the show, and they had an altar call after the performance. And it was really strange because I was, since we had been there so long, we got to know all the tech people, So I was standing by the soundboard listening to the show. And, I just knew I had to commit to this.
Wow.
I don't know how I knew that, but I knew it. And I said yes.
Wow.
I said yes to that prodding, that gentle,
right,
soft voice.
Sure.
And the weirdest thing happened. It's like the sound guy was standing right next to me, and he just hit the floor, passed out. And so I'm snapped out of my my moment, and we all rushed to get this guy out of this room, and get him out in the hallway, and somebody's going to, so he can get some air or maybe resuscitate him, whatever's going on, As soon as we get him out there on the floor, he comes to. But that was my moment, and I've been a Christian ever since then. And it was so funny. Our last day at the festival, that night before we left, all the founding fathers of the festival came to our bungalow and told us how disappointed they were in us. We were the biggest thing in the festival, I mean, Mike Rowe had kids following him around every day, like the Pied Piper.
Yeah.
We'd wake up in the morning and kids would be at the door waiting for us to come out just to hang, you know.
Mike was a bona fide rock star.
Oh, yeah, he still is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so they said, well, we just want you guys to know that you'll never be back. You'll never be asked to come back here again. And we're just so disappointed, and we feel like we've been deceived because we found out that somebody in the band is not a Christian.
Wow.
And that was me.
Yeah.
I wasn't when I first arrived, but when I left, I was. And they never asked me had I had a change of heart or about my experience or anything. It was just like the gauntlet was down.
You didn't feel like sharing that with them at that point?
No, not at that point. Because I was new at that.
Yeah.
I just thought it was funny. You know, it's kind of hypocritical, and I don't know. I just remained silent, and sure enough, we were never asked back.
That's so strange.
And so when I come back home, okay, I'm a Christian now, and the Sevens want me to do their record and want me to be in the band, and the people at Exit go, sure.
Yeah, right. Right. Yeah, you're okay now.
Yeah, I'm okay now.
Well, yeah, it's kind of funny, and we've talked about that over the last few weeks of somehow people accidentally do get that wrong quite often. Like, had you not gone to that trip and been, you may never would have had your conversion. Who knows? I mean, as far as they know, at least.
Right.
And the fact that in a way they were a part of it in an ancillary way, it seems like they would just be over the moon.
Mm-hmm.
You know, to take, and I know Charlie Peacock, he had a real open heart for different people who weren't necessarily believers, and saw some really great results because of it, because of his heart toward just human beings.
Mm-hmm. Well, when Charlie quit Vector and started his own band, and because Charlie's like livelihood was playing clubs, even before his conversion,
right?
And so, the church was asking him not to play clubs anymore, and he was like, I can't do that, you know.
Right.
And we didn't see any sense. He didn't see any sense in it. You know, why not? I need to take this message to my friends in the clubs, you know. And finally, the pastor of Warehouse relented, and Charlie started playing in clubs, which allowed the rest of us to be able to go play clubs, you know. Prior to that, the Sevens and all the acts at Exit only played what we used to call junior prisons, you know, where delinquents were housed and kept for a while. We'd go there and play like once a month.
Yeah. And
we played it at church. The church would have concerts every other Saturday, you know, which were huge, you know, always packed out. And sure enough, once we start playing clubs, people in the clubs start coming to the concerts at church, you know.
Yeah.
And some of those people were saved through that, you know, which was a great testament.
That happened in the Orange County scene during that same period as well. It was a real movement where the bands were finally allowed to go into the clubs where they should be. And and I used to be in a band that once a month played prisons and juvenile centers and stuff. And then you see those people years later at your show. Right. Or at your church. It's funny how we miss such an important thing, because especially if we feel the purpose of music is evangelistic or can be, then why aren't you doing it?
Right.
You know?
Right.
Why are we being handcuffed to be able to not go where it could happen?
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome that they did allow for that, though. So now you're in this odd and really important part of early Christian rock.
Mm-hmm. And I'm also in Romeo Void. At the
Oh,
same
you're still
time.
in it at this
I'm
point.
still
Okay.
with Romeo Void.
Okay.
And after we do Instincts, we do a tour around the United States and a tour of Europe. And I remember we used to buy Billboard magazine, the new issues every time they came out. And the college charts, the 77s and Romeo Void were always in the top 10, you know. And on some campuses, Romeo Void would have a higher rating, and then some campuses, 77s would have a higher. So it was pretty entertaining to sit there and go and laugh, you know, laugh at that irony of that.
Which 77s record would that be? Was that the very first one, like All Fall Down?
All Fall Down.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Which is just, it's a great record.
Yeah, it's a good record.
And the first time I even saw the 77s in that era, like, you know, it seems mean to say, but a lot of the Christian bands did sometimes seem a little junior league. But sevens were like, you could put them with anybody.
Yeah, we worked on that. We wanted to be major players, I guess you could call it. And we worked on our professionalism and the sound, and oh man, we were so tight.
Yeah,
I mean, we rehearsed every day. You know, once I was out of Romeo Void, once that blew up, before I went out on tour with Romeo Void, I moved to Sacramento from San Francisco. Yeah. So when we would come home, home was now Sacramento. Yeah. And the Sevens weren't touring or anything, weren't doing much, because this was still during the time where the church didn't want them playing clubs. Right. You know, and so there was really never any conflict for me, you know, having to cancel one gig to do another gig. Right.
You
never
have
had
to
that
prioritize.
conflict. Yeah. Because once Romeo Void was over, you know, it was like wide open to do the 77s. We could now play clubs, and, you know, it was okay.
Yeah. Well, about time. And I'm glad. I just don't know that people realize how much some of those early artists like Stonehill and Larry Norman, Daniel Amos, how much they had to go through. Right. They were getting so shot at by the church, as well as the world. You know.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we'll take this up again.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Hi, I'm Tim Dolbear, the host of Sound Experience on Intertalk Radio. Each week, I talk with top professional audio engineers, producers, musicians, and the manufacturers that make the tools that we use in the studio each and every day. From capturing the perfect take to mastering your final release, and the tools and how the pros use them, we are going to dive deep into their process and learn from their experience. I look forward to you joining us each week on Sound Experience with me, your host, Tim Dolbear.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al DiMeola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
Okay, we're back, folks, and I was just telling Mark about there was this really cool sort of factory-like environment at Exit Records because we had all these acts. We had Charlie Peacock, Vector, 77, Steve Scott, and there was a metal band. I can't remember their name. But the metal band was the only band that was self-contained.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else, we all played in each other's bands.
Yeah.
So when you check out the early Vector records, Charlie records, Steve Scott 77s, you'll find the same musicians on
right.
it. You know, it was very cool because we had our own studio engineer. There was no scheduling for studio. You know, if you had a tune, you had a project, you just go in and do it because the engineer was there all the time. That was his job, to be there all the time. And we rehearsed.
Anybody does that now?
No.
I can't think of anybody.
I can't either, unless you go to a private studio. You know, where
right. That's what I mean. Where it's just in-house at a church, and it certainly would be easier than ever right now.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't think of one example.
Right, me either. So we rehearsed there. I mean, it was great. We worked there, you know. It was a situation that was almost perfect.
Yeah.
You know, and
this is all being overseen by Mary Neely,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
head of Exit Records.
Right. And the pastor, Lewis, her husband. Neely.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that detail.
Yeah. But then with success came the need to be self-contained.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlie went out and found players for his band. So did Vector, Steve Scott, and Jimmy. And I stayed with the Sevens. Steve Griffith and Jimmy and Vector. I stayed with the Sevens, and Steve Scott continued to use all of us because he wasn't really. Steve was a pastor at church, so he wasn't.
He wasn't out touring,
out going to clubs, touring and stuff like that. Very artistic.
Do you feel like, in retrospect, you decided to put your allegiance with the Sevens? Do you feel like that was the best choice?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because Chuck sure had a thing, man. Going to, I mean, I would have went with the Sevens,
mm-hmm.
but Lie Down in the Grass was a great record. I remember seeing videos on MTV, the whole deal.
Yeah, yeah.
Just a monster. Like, it really wouldn't have shocked me if Mike Rowe or Chuck would have became, big stars.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. One thing about the Sevens is that I didn't have to change a thing about the way I played drums or thought about, how drums should be played. Whatever I came up with, that was good. That was it. Yeah. So I had a voice there, and there were no limitations on that voice. As long as, we played some kind of rockabilly sounding things, but that's just a matter of getting the feel right.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's where my home was. I remember when we were in Prestaten, we used to rehearse there because it was agreed that I was going to do their record, which became All Fall Down. I wasn't technically in the band yet, but I was going to do their record, and we used to rehearse for that record every day. And this is when Prince and The Time had just come out, know, and I was going, man, you guys need to do some steps or something. Yeah, because I had seen.
I would love to see Roe do
right.
that.
When I first met the 77s and heard their music, they were at Greenbelt. It was a film of them at Greenbelt.
In England, yeah.
And the music was raucous and rocking, and you know, but if you look at the guys on stage, they were very still, and they looked like the Beach Boys. They're dressed like the Beach Boys. The music and the visual did not go together.
I see.
You know, and that was a big deal for me because it just didn't. The two things just didn't match.
Yeah.
But to their credit, they just loosened up. Yeah. And Roe started being more extravagant in his hairstyles and his clothing, and it just made everybody else kind of find
their way.
Yeah, find your way in it.
Well, yeah, and gosh, I think about all the bands you grew up playing in, like the Temps and all that stuff. I mean, being a great band is fine, but you got to have a great act.
Yeah, you got to entertain, man.
And all those Motown bands, they had a great act.
Yeah, yeah. They went to school for it. They went to Motown school. You know? They had a department for that, you know.
So the Sevens figured out a rock and roll equivalent of being an act and having a thing, which is really half the time. The nice thing about rock, when you do it right, when I think of some of the best live bands, it's not like you have to go to a school and learn how to choreograph your movements. You just have to learn to not care what people think.
Right.
And you have to learn to really let go and let the music happen.
Right.
Stay out of the way of it. You know,
right.
Someone like Pete Townsend was the ultimate who, like, it looked just like it sounded.
Exactly.
And that's a cool thing they didn't do in the showbiz bands. And that's, but God, Mike, he was right there with all of them by the end of it. Just a confident, owned that stage.
Going to England and spending time in England was good for us. And well, even in Prestatyn, we used to go to this restaurant on the beach, and the lady would give us our own room to eat in, and she had this big console, and we tune into BBC Radio and heard all this great British music, you know, rock from the 80s, and that sort of stuff. What was that? Melody Maker magazine,
of course.
You know, all that.
New Musical Express, yeah.
All that stuff, you know, kind of open our eyes to the possibilities of, you know, clothing, stage appearance, music, possibilities of things we could do musically. And it was good for us because, you know, back then, that was, if you going to England, going to Europe, you really got to see it and experience it.
Sure.
And sometimes you got to hear and see things that had not been seen in the States or heard in the States yet, you know. So we used to always bring records back home, and we'd have them before they were ever released in the States. And so we had a little jump on that, you know, on that scene.
Well, there was that period that was very exciting where you could go into, you know, my local record chain from where I grew up, and I could get the Sevens record or Chuck's records on Island Records or A&M right in the bin next to everybody else.
Yeah.
Which is what I always thought it should be.
Right.
And I always hoped it would be. And I don't know that anyone got really closer than Exit to making that a real thing.
Right.
As many people have tried since. But as exciting as and fruitful and important as Exit Records was to the development of like Christian music, it really was only around 4 or 5 years, right? And when it was gone, it seemed like it was just gone.
Yeah. There are two people that I know personally who were very helpful in getting our music exposed in the towns and cities that they lived in. Randy Layton up in Oregon.
I know that name.
He got us on the radio. He got us he worked at a record store and personally put our records with everybody else's.
Yeah.
Promoted shows for us. We played this room called Wow Hall, packed. Just amazing. We're on the charts in Portland. It's like top 5 on the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And then you had John Joseph Thompson in Chicago. He had True Tunes.
Yeah.
He did the same thing. He started out doing the same thing, making sure he would move our records to the other bands. And then he started his own record store,
Yeah, John he will keep coming up in podcasts for many years.
Yeah.
Very important part of the independent music scene.
Mm-hmm.
And lives right up the street.
He does. I could hit his house with a rock.
Well, don't do that.
I won't.
Well, yeah. So yeah, it is funny to me that it did that, and I always found it kind of interesting. Of course, I was a Christian by then, by the early '80s, but I always thought, well, George Harrison's record, he was a Hare Krishna, I believe.
Uh-huh.
His records were right next to Bad Company and Aerosmith records, but he had a religious point of view.
Right.
So did Richard Thompson as a Sufi, and different people. But that never worked really for Christians. You either didn't talk about it at all, or you had to go be at the back of the bookstore behind the Precious Moments figurines.
Right.
Is where your records were.
And even there, you had to be singing the right things.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, no, getting somebody like the Sevens into a Christian bookstore in 1983, that was a big deal. Because all the sweet old dolls, they don't know.
Right.
They go and they see that, and that just ain't right to them.
Right. They see a guy laying on the floor.
Yeah.
On
They
the
didn't know what to
album
make
cover.
of it. It's so funny when you know some of those guys like Michael Breau or Mike Stan from the Altar Boys. Their show was quite crazy, but their life and I know Mike Stan from experience. He was a very proper, squeaky clean. He was a worship leader.
Mm-hmm.
He was very connected to his church family. He just happened to be this wild frontman.
Mm-hmm.
But there are people that couldn't buy him as a person in their church because of it. And I know Ro went through it. I know he did.
We had a record we had a song about abortion called Your Pretty Baby.
Mm-hmm.
And it was speaking to the conscience of a woman who's considering abortion.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, your pretty baby won't know,
Yeah. Wow.
That sort of thing. Great song. We even had testimonies to where that song had influenced some young teenage women not to have an abortion.
That's awesome.
But there were radio stations, Christian radio stations around the country and in Canada that banned that song, would not play it.
Yeah, I wish I could say I was surprised.
Yeah.
But
it's the weirdest thing.
So now this would take us to roughly 1987. Would be about when Exit shut its doors.
No, because we did one of our best records in 88.
Oh, okay.
The live record.
I thought the label went down in 87. But then again, I heard that on the internet where turns out everything isn't always true.
Yeah, I don't know the exact timeline, but we recorded 88 in 88. And soon after that, things just fell apart.
Right.
Charlie, got interest in record labels here in Nashville, and he decided to move here.
Right.
Luckily, he would call me to Nashville to play on the records he was producing. Margaret Becker.
Sure.
Jimmy did a record. Jimmy Abeck did a record.
I remember that.
And Charlie eventually opened up a little studio out in Bellevue. And I was commuting quite a bit.
But still based in Sacramento.
Still based in Sacramento.
How long did you stay there? It seems to me at the end of the 90s, yeah?
I moved to Nashville in 1996.
Right. So there's a lot of space there between 88 and 96.
Yeah. And that's commuting
and playing with Chuck.
Yeah. And playing with the newly reorganized, revitalized 77s.
Okay, right.
With Mark Harmon and Dave Leonard.
Yeah, I love those guys.
And, I was playing around town, Sacramento, all the time, playing jazz gigs.
Yeah. Would it be mean to say I actually like that version of the Sevens the best with Mark Harmon and all?
You do?
I do.
Okay.
Something about it I thought was a little more connected, and I thought you guys were a really strong rhythm section.
Huh. Yeah, Mark's a great bass player. Mark was definitely a stronger bass player. Is a stronger bass player. Mark's brilliant. I don't know. For me, that period was a period of uncertainty.
Sure.
The original Sevens had been such a brotherhood,
Right, I see that.
Yeah, and we were so close, and we spent so much time together, and we had created this thing that it was almost like a betrayal, I couldn't really get into the new Sevens that much because I was, it was a lot of upheaval in my life. I had to figure out what to do because, I had put so much stock into the success of the 77s that when it blew up,
right.
It's like, well, what do I do now?
Right.
So, and coming back and forth from Sacramento to Nashville, seeing what's going on here, meeting people here and that sort of thing, I made the decision to move.
Yeah. Well, and somewhere in that timeline, you either had or were about to have a couple of very beautiful young girls in your life.
Well, I did have. I had already had them, and they were part of the reason, I had to support those two beautiful girls in my life.
Well, you did a good job.
All right, folks, we'll be right back. Thank you to Pitbull Audio and Studio Instrument Rentals. We'll see you guys in about 2 minutes.
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear, host of Sound Experience here on Intertalk Radio. And Source Connect by Source Element is the essential tool that we use to link between my studio in Austin, Texas and the WS radio station in San Diego. Now with Source Connect, not only can we communicate in real time and with HD audio, but it's synced up and is of a high enough quality that I can use it for real-time ADR work, remote recording and overdubbing, and it even allows me to remotely control a DAW. Source Connect by Source Element. Affordable, high-quality audio and video connection over the internet for all of your production needs.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Make this your vinyl night. I'm John J.R. Robinson, and every week, music creation comes alive through stories, experiences, and sounds when vinyl records filled our hearts and minds. My friends and I share our tips and techniques used in creation of iconic tracks for recording artists such as Michael Jackson, Eric Clapton, Quincy Jones, and Steve Winwood, to name a few. Vinyl has emerged hot, and the soul of vinyl defines art and passion which burns deepest at night. Tune in every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on intertalkradio.com.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.
welcome to Intersect Radio, where music, faith, and life converge. With your host, Aaron the A-Train Smith.
Okay, welcome back, folks. Thank you for hanging in there with us. And we were just talking before that commercial break. We were talking about my commuting back and forth from Sacramento to Nashville, and finally moving to Nashville in 1996, doing some session studio work and doing a lot of odd jobs. Fortunately enough, though, I didn't have to do odd jobs too long because I think it was that summer of 96 or 97. I went to the Summer NAMM show.
Mm-hmm.
And I ran into Jimmy and Rick Elias.
Okay.
Jimmy Abeg and Rick Elias. I didn't know Rick, but I was very familiar with Jimmy because we had lived in Sacramento together. And he goes like, "What are you doing? What are you up to these days?" "Not much." He said, "Well, we were talking about asking you to join the Rich Mullins band." And I said, "Sure, that'd be great." He said, "Okay, we'll call you." And sure enough.
Did you say sure that'd be great because it was work or because you were hip to Rich's stuff?
Because it was work.
That's what my guess.
I wasn't hip to Rich's music at all. I had seen an album cover at Jan Volz's house with Rich Mullins on the front. You know, it's a very stylistic. You know, he's like in front of a campfire, and he's got these beautiful,
I remember that one.
You know,
looked like an LL Bean catalog.
Yeah, exactly. Hair slicked back. You know, that was my exposure, my first exposure to Rich Mullins. And then I get a call from Gay Quisenberry. We set it up. And then that's when I first meet you and Rich and get to know Rick. And it's in the middle of a cornfield in Indiana.
Illinois.
Yeah. At a little church.
I know, because that was my first rehearsal, too.
Yeah. At a little church surrounded by corn. And it was like, wow. And we get to rehearsal, and you and I are the only ones that know the music.
Yeah.
That was so strange, you know, because I was really intimidated learning these songs, you know.
I was too, especially the liturgy record, because it was pretty elaborate and really, really good players on that record, really good session guys. And I'm thinking, I've got to be Danny O'Lanerty now. I had to learn how to play upright for that tour,
right?
And I barely got through it. But all those things, I felt the same way. I'm glad to know you did too, because I'm like, I'm not going to be the weak link here, man.
Right.
I'm going to at least know how to copy the tunes.
Right. Yeah, and it was such a relief to get there and have a lot of time off during rehearsals while people learn their parts.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just sitting there waiting. And that was great. And then we went to Cornerstone after that.
We sure did, yeah.
Yeah. We spent a lot of time on the road with Rich. But that was a great experience because he was not the person I thought he was.
Yeah.
Judging by that album cover I'd seen, you know. And he was another guy that just let you be yourself.
Yeah. Musically
and personally or whatever, you know. Just no strict rules, no rules. You know, I could play the way I wanted to play. Sometimes I think I should have adjusted my style a bit to fit what he was doing, but that's all in hindsight. Man, I was just so Tony Williams minded that sometimes I was no musical good.
I don't remember it that way, but I do. I was shocked how quickly we sounded like an actual band.
Yeah, we did.
And I really, Rich meant a lot to me very quickly. I thought, this guy's the real deal. He's got something extra. I loved his voice. I really loved the sincerity and how much he attached himself to his lyrics. And even though he didn't have a perfect voice, but I just loved it. And he was funny and he was weird. And I don't know, man. I think had you learned it perfectly, I don't know that he would have liked you as much.
Well, you know, I kind of left out this one gig I had before I moved here. I did a tour with Mike Card.
Oh, right.
That was definitely a situation where I was so Tony Williams minded that I was no musical good, you know, and I wish I had adjusted my thinking and playing a bit just to fit in with Mike, because his style, and he was entrenched in his style and what he was doing and how he wanted it done and stuff like that. And sometimes I think I should have been a little more sensitive to that, but I get, you know, it didn't get fired or anything.
No, we all got to get there the way we get there.
Yeah.
Man, I only remember, and it wasn't your fault, I only remember having trouble playing one song initially where I never got past the point of having to just count in my head, which was that weird breakdown in the color green, which is in an odd time signature. It's that that real Irish thing.
Yeah.
And you were going just so far out there. It was solid. Thank goodness for your kick foot, or I wouldn't have known what to do. I mean, I was just doing math through the whole song. But I thought that was part of what I wound up hearing live recordings of it later. It makes perfect sense to me now. I also noticed I really was fascinated by, I don't know if you still do it on sessions, but you used to, back when we were doing those records, and you played on several things I've produced and a bunch of records, but I noticed when you would bring your own click setup with you, and you would create these like polyrhythm things that had nothing to do with the beat, but they all worked around the beat to sort of inform the kind of grease you wanted to put on it. I always found that I don't know a drummer who's done that in the studio. And at the time, you were going through a lot of trouble to do it. It sounded to me.
Yeah.
You were creating this imaginary percussion part to go with your drums.
Right. And a part to play with it, knowing that that stuff wouldn't be there in the final mix. I did that with there's 77's record. The first time I did that, I Can't Get Over It. We learned that song, and we just couldn't figure out a groove to it. And so I came up with this loop to play with, and it killed it. It was great, you know. And we finally found that space for I Can't Get Over It, and it's one of my favorite 77.
It's songs. One of my very favorite 77 songs by far.
Yeah, it's very cool.
That's one of the first ones that really got me. And Don't This Way is also a good one.
Yeah, Don't This Way. Yeah.
Okay, so now we at this point we're pals. We're playing together a lot. We're doing records Rick produced. We're doing various side projects of Rich's or whatever it is. And in 1997, September, we lose Rich. And it kind of, the floor came out from a lot of us, because I don't know about you, but at that point, I absolutely made him my priority.
Yeah.
Anything he wanted, I would have done it.
Yeah, it's my job.
Yeah. And but I felt more connected to it than employment. I started taking that part for granted, but I was single. What do I care? I was making more money than I knew what to do with, because I didn't need much. So, but then he's gone. Yeah. Now, and I'd invested so much into him at the expense of a lot of this train and a lot of other things I'd done. So it was everything at once. It's like he's a powerful part of my life as a mentor, as a friend, but he was also my paycheck.
Right.
And all of that is gone in one instant.
Yeah.
How did that hit you to keep going?
It was another, well, what do I do now moment?
Yeah.
You know? And you know how it is here. It used to be here. You know, if you weren't in town, you didn't get any sessions.
Correct.
You know, people stopped calling you.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a real hard time because I made most of my money painting apartments after that.
Wow.
And I became a contractor for this guy and painting apartments. And he had this one thing. I remember 9/11 that day. He had me going to Murfreesboro to paint a brand new apartment complex by myself.
Oh, wow.
3 stories.
Wow.
So I didn't finish that. God intervened again, and I got a job at a medical malpractice insurance company.
I remember that era. I remember it because I couldn't get you on a record.
Right.
I wanted to have you do some sessions for me, and you had just decided to try and commit to that.
Yeah. Well, I had to at the moment.
Yeah.
At that time, it was just like, man, I got to do this. And I did that for 8 years, and then that ended all of a sudden. And I got remarried to a wonderful lady who pretty much shook me to my senses and said, "You're a musician. You're not an insurance guy. You're a musician, and that's what you should be doing." And I think the scales fell from my eyes, and I went, "Darn it, you're right." And so I had built this drum room here in the house, so I started practicing, and I still practice. I got a gig playing. I had a gig playing with Waldo Weathers, who used to be in James Brown's band. We were playing B.B. King's every weekend, doing weddings and stuff like that. And then Waldo moved to Germany. That ended. And so the gigs and recording opportunities, they were few and far between. For one, because I took that job at the insurance company, you know. And for some reason, I thought that since things had stopped for me, they had stopped for everybody else too.
Right.
And boy, was I surprised to learn that everybody had kept going.
Yeah.
And music was still going, and people were still had their careers and stuff like that. And
well, if you think touring hurts your session work, get a straight gig.
Yes.
It's the weirdest kind of albatross.
It is.
And you definitely get judged for it. I think, I know, you know, well, it didn't happen to me just because, again, I didn't have 2 kids to worry about and things like that. So I could kind of weather that storm a little easier. You know, I just tighten the belt for a few months till something else came along.
Right.
You didn't have that luxury.
I didn't have that, man. It was like a feast or famine.
Yeah. Well, so now I find it wonderfully ironic that your wife, you know, as musicians, we go at least half of our lives with people above us are saying, like, you got to get out of this and get a dang job.
Get a real job.
And then one day you find the person who says the exact opposite because she gets who you are.
You're right.
And she knows you would never be happy and live to your potential and your calling.
So now I do some gigs around town, jazz gigs around town.
You're involved with the jazz workshop as well.
Yeah. And I just did a cruise with Kevin Max, the Jesus Freak cruise. It was just great, and did some other gigs with Kevin, and I have a gig coming up on December the 1st with Kevin out at the Franklin Theater. And I'm trying to put together this presentation playing the music of Art Blakey.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. I had hoped that it would happen in the month of November. But then once I start getting into the music, I realized that in order to do it justice and present it properly, it's going to take a little time.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So I got a bunch of players together for that.
And you have this podcast, which has been a really neat vehicle for you to talk to different people. And I certainly know people have gotten more and more interested in it. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I've spent more time one-on-one with you.
No kidding. Yeah, we've done a couple of these now. Yeah. I want to say 6. Crazy. 1 with the Rags, 2 with me, 3 with you.
That's right.
But, man, thanks so much for letting me be a part of it. It's a huge honor. And even for being your friend for quite a while now.
This is Jackie Bertoni from Jackie's Groove. Come join me weekly on my journey through the music business as I take you behind the velvet rope, interviewing industry notables such as Al Di Meola, Michael McDonald, and Al Jarreau, to name but a few. Listen to their stories on being in the studios recording #1 hits and onto the stages throughout the globe. Allow me to be your music historian. You can hear me live every Monday at 2 p.m. and every Wednesday at 12 noon Pacific Standard Time or 24/7 on jackiesgroove.com. Ready to get your groove on?
Hi, this is Tim Dolbear from Eclectica Studios. I'm a full-time mixing and recording engineer. I work with Grammy winners, labels, and indie artists, using state-of-the-art digital mixing and restoration tools and the very best in analog gear. Really, though, it's my ability to bring tracks to life and fulfill your vision for your music. This has made me sought after by producers and artists worldwide. So spend your time working on music and not chasing a mix down a rabbit hole. Go to timdolbear.com and check out our free one-song mix offer.
You know what's all around you every waking moment of your life? Marketing. You're choking on it. I'm Scott Robertson, and when it comes to strategic PR, branding, and marketing, I've seen it all. And actually, I'm still seeing it because bad marketing never sleeps. Join me each week on May the Best Brand Win, right here on Intertalk Radio, and learn how to make the marketing for your brand unforgettable.
Are you serious about your music? Are you ready to run with the big dogs? The experts at Pitbull Audio have the gear to get you into the game. From leading manufacturers like Mesa Boogie, Fender, Pioneer, and American Audio. To sound your best, you need the best. Pitbull Audio can deliver in rehearsal, on stage, and into the big time. Dropping beats, shredding guitar, or making the crowd roar. Whatever you dream, Pitbull Audio can help make it happen. We are Pitbull Audio. We want you to play it loud. PitbullAudio.com.